Hello, thanks for being with us. This is Talking Europe on France 24, where today we're speaking to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi. Now, irregular migration is still very much a question, looking for answers here in Europe. 6 years on from the huge influx of 2015. Just a few days ago, Filippo Grandi's native Italy was the place where there was yet another fatal shipwreck. At least 7 migrants died trying to reach the island of Lampedusa, including a pregnant woman. Filippo Grandi, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start with that news that I just mentioned about the shipwreck off Lampedusa. These events were reported, but this specific incident barely made the headlines. Do you believe that Europeans are starting to turn a blind eye?
They turn a blind eye to everything except when people arrive on their coast, and that worries everybody. This is a real scandal, isn't it? And it shows the attitude of the European of Europe towards this issue. Now, I am the first one to recognize that managing flows into Europe, it's extremely complex. It's partly Europe's fault because the politicization of this issue has made it much more complicated than it should be. But so be it. That's a fact. That's the situation. So that's why it's so important to fix the issue of how these people are received and distributed. Meanwhile, what is extremely important is to say that whatever system is in place or not in place, rescue at sea remains an absolute duty, an absolute necessity that Europe has to fulfill. And the fact that rescue at sea in the Mediterranean does not have a system led by states and organized so that people can be rescued is a fundamental violation of the right of the sea.
Well, European states also cooperating with, for example, the Libyan coastguard. And in the last couple of days, the German charity Sea-Watch released aerial footage of what it says is Libyan coastguard vessels are firing at migrants in the Mediterranean, possibly trying to ram their boat. Now, at the time of recording, this hasn't been verified whether this was actually the Libyan Coast Guard. But considering this European cooperation with this force, what's your reaction to this video? And should European leaders be formally investigating this?
Well, of course, the facts need to be ascertained, as you said, because if it was confirmed, it would be extremely grave. Having said this, a more general comment. There's nothing wrong with strengthening the Libyan Coast Guard. But 2 observations here. One, then it has to be reinforced in a manner that allows it to do its job properly, including rescue at sea in the Libyan areas. This is not always the case. Now, leaving aside this incident, we know from other organizations, for example, that information is not provided, that coordination is not efficient. So that's one aspect, meaning that building up is not sufficient yet. Second, it is not enough to simply strengthen the Coast Guard. Why? Because the Coast Guard intercepts and brings people back. If those people are then thrown back into the detention centers that we've been trying to eliminate for the past few years and enter into a system which is corrupt, which is abusive, and which is violent. So if one institution is reinforced by Europe, the Libyan Coast Guard, everything else in Libya needs to be strengthened so that migration flows through that country can be handled properly.
And given the state of affairs in Libya, for a long time there's been chaos there, politically speaking. Do you think it is possible to achieve that strengthening you're talking about? How long could that take?
Well, we have made progress. We, the UN, IOM, UNHCR, other organizations have been in Libya for a long time. There's been moments in which progress has been achieved. The population in the detention centers has gone down. Now, COVID has made things more complicated there as everywhere else. But I think that it is important that those investments made are strengthened, that the space that we have to do humanitarian work, institution building work, giving opportunities to these people in Libya, that this space is defended and expanded, and we need cooperation with the Libyan authorities and the international community, and in particular European states.
While we're speaking about cooperation with third countries, Danish lawmakers recently approved the establishment of a refugee reception centre outside of its borders. Now, this just approved at this point, nothing's been built. The new law, though, would force asylum seekers to apply in person at the Danish border, then be flown outside Europe for processing by a third country. Rwanda has been cited as a possible place. What's the UNHCR's position on this?
We call this externalizing asylum. It's not entirely new. The Australians have done it. The Trump administration did it in the United States. And now we have this Danish effort. We're against it. We're against it because to deny asylum seekers access to the territory of a state is the end of asylum, fundamentally. Now, we fully recognize that access to European territory has to be better regulated, more shared among European nations, made more efficient. And we've made tons of suggestions to European states on how to do that. But to deny access is fundamentally wrong. What am I to say to countries in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia, in Latin America that host not 2,000-3,000 asylum seekers like some European countries, but hundreds of thousands of refugees? What am I to tell them? You know, you can externalize to another country? That would be the end of asylum as we know it, the end of the role of my organization.
Well, the European Commission has indicated it feels Denmark's plan would breach European law. On the EU's doorstep, it's been reported in the last week that the British government is planning to follow this example when it introduces a new nationality and borders bill in Parliament in the next few days. The UK, of course, no longer bound by European laws. Can it just do what it wants on this kind of issue?
Well, there are principles and approaches that are codified in international law, not just in European law, by the 1951 Refugee Convention, by other legal instruments. So everything will have to be checked against those instruments when it is implemented. And we are in dialogue with all these states. We want to continue to dialogue with them, but we want them to observe and uphold those rules. As I said, what Europe does is extremely important, per se, for people arriving in Europe, but also for the rest of the world.
Let's talk about the EU's border and coastguard agency, Frontex, a key component in the migration picture. Now, independent journalists and rights groups have alleged that Frontex has been involved in illegal pushbacks. There have been many documented events. Just for our viewers, this meaning that asylum seekers are pushed away or turned away before they've had a chance to apply for asylum. Filippo Grandi, what do you make of these allegations? Do you believe that they're credible?
Well, there's been instances in which investigations on these allegations have proven correct, have proven the allegations correct, and I do hope that that will be corrected. Now, I do not think that that is Frontex policy to push back, but pushbacks have occurred on the part of various member states at the external borders of Europe, and they cannot happen. They are against international law, and Frontex is there to help state control, but not to help state violate the law.
Well, the EU's Fundamental Rights Agency is investigating. If these allegations are found to be true, what should happen with Frontex? This is an agency that's ballooned in size, its budget going up to 900 million euros by the year 2027. What should be happening with Frontex if these allegations are proven true?
Well, I think that everything needs to be done by Frontex, by the European authorities, for this not to happen again. It's as simple as that. And you know, I think that the emphasis that Europe is putting all the time on control is understandable. Control is legitimate. It's even a duty of member states of Europe and of Frontex to help them do that. But control cannot be either complicity in pushbacks or even turning a blind eye to that happening, because we always say control has to be done in a manner that is mindful of people's rights. And it is perfectly possible to reconcile the two dynamics, protection and control. It is perfectly possible.
And just on the political level, a new EU migration plan presented September last year. There's not been much progress. We've still got Hungary, Poland, Slovakia and Czech Republic, among others, refusing to take in or relocate any asylum seekers. They say, look, we'll show solidarity by financing border operations. What do you make of this stance? Is this ever going to come to anything?
I do not know. I hope so. The pact in itself, which is still in the form of a proposal by the European Commission, we believe is good. We've been consulted by the Commission in its preparation. We've given our opinions. Much of it has been taken into account, so that's good. It's not perfect, but it's the best balance between the principle of solidarity, which is very much promoted by the frontline states, and the principle of border control and good management at borders that is very much promoted by other states. It's a bit of a tension between these two that has not yet been reconciled. But work is being done to find a balance, and I think it's possible to achieve it, but it will require time because of this extreme politicization of the issue. Now, there's been some talk recently, and I was in France up to this morning, in fact, and there's been some talk about starting with a partial accord, a partial agreement between a certain number of like-minded states. Now, I don't think that's ideal because it should be a union-wide approach. But if it is a step towards that direction, if it gives an example that it is possible to be better at borders and better in solidarity among a few states, let it be as an embryo of a future continental or European Union pact.
All right, Filippo Grandi, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks to you as well for watching Talking Europe, and stay with us. Part 2 coming up in a few minutes' time.